Being offended by somebody's words and actions is an absolute choice. But the choice can come from a lot of things: insecurity, injustices, a lot of things. But it can be very, very harmful to your own mental health, physical health, and everything involved. So that's what we're going to talk about today on the Positivity Experience. Understanding why you're offended and then how to work through that so you're not offended more. Check it out. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positivity Experience. It's your girl, Lori, and man, am I excited that you guys are here today. First and foremost, I want to thank all of the newest Patreon subscribers. And as always, over on Patreon today, we are going to have a complimentary that's going to complement this podcast. And it's going to talk about how you can start restructuring some of your limited beliefs, what that looks like. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to jump over to the Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Positivity Experience, or you can just go anywhere you're finding this podcast and click the little link right there. But that is, so it's going to kind of complement, and it comes with a little worksheet, kind of helps you work through some of your things, but you don't need it if you don't want it, but here we are. So I want to talk to you about it because being offended is something that can be so problematic, and it can actually be used against you, right? Your offense can be weaponized, and then your insecurities and everything that come along with that can make you try to go and be offensive to others. It's just all in all problematic. So before we start, outside of just life coaching and stuff, I did study human behavior, why we as humans do what we do. And I started that really because I was trying to understand my anxieties, my depression, all of these other things, and why I was taking things so personally and why I was in a victim state. And it just didn't make sense to just say, oh, you're depressed. Well, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, why am I depressed? Like, what is going on in my life? And not just socially and within my life, but what's going on in my brain? Like, what is happening? And so it really helped me understand the critter brain, which you might have heard is the reptilian brain or the survival brain, which is where I lived a lot of times. And so understanding it, it became this rabbit hole addiction of mine to go down to understand more and more and more as to why we as humans do what we do and why we do it. And, and the thoughts, and I'm telling you, there is, and I'm just scratching the surface, and I've been doing it for years. And there's so much more to learn about the human brain and why we respond as such. So being offended, right? You see that it's really big these days, right? You see everybody taking offense to everything. Somebody makes an action. They take an action, or there's words that are being said, and people are like, "Oh my God, I'm offended." You see that a lot with spirituality, politics, gender bias, yes, these are all real things, right? So I'm not saying being offended is like, oh my God, you're way out of line. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying though, is you want to understand why, because when you're walking around offended by everything, that's not really a way to live, because then suddenly now that becomes people walking on eggshells around you. You have these high expectations, and that is one of the things for being offended. Is your expectations. You get offended when someone doesn't do it the way you would do it. You get offended when someone doesn't say it the way you do. The root of all offense feelings is insecurity. Now that's the root. Now we're going to spread out on that because there's so much to talk about. But if we're putting it under a big umbrella, we just popped open this giant umbrella. That's the umbrella of insecurity. You have a high level of insecurity when you're walking around being offended, because So let's unbox it, right? So we're going to start off a little easy, and we're going to go, a little dicey. So just know we're getting ready to go into some territory that a lot of people don't like to talk about. I don't mind, right? Because somebody's got to talk about it, because the gray elephant in the room doesn't just disappear because you don't feel like talking about something. So we're going to go, we're going to start light, and we're going to go pretty deep. Okay. So just be prepared for it, because it might be triggering for you. And if it is, it's a good way to know that you have those areas to still heal. And it was funny because I don't know if it was on TikTok or Reels or something, and somebody said, I think it was just recently, I've had this comment before, but somebody said, I can always judge where I am in my healing phase by how offended I am by something you post. And they put like a heart, like, I'm so happy to see that, because when you get offended and you get like triggered by something, it is letting you know that there's something that you're not addressing, right? So we're not blaming you for being offended. Get that out of your head. Don't get upset with other people when they get offended by everything. It lets you know that there's an insecurity that they're not dealing with, right? And sometimes, I mean, let's be honest, not all of us love change. I don't mind change. Didn't used to love it, but I kind of don't mind it now. A lot of people don't like change because you get used to the same thing, which is why you'll find sometimes, even if it's chaotic and you're like, why am I so comfortable in chaos, right? You're comfortable in chaos. Well, because you're used to it. You know how to function there. So if I took you in the middle of that chaos and I picked you up and I put you in the middle of Aruba on an island, all expenses paid, everything there, in your mind, you go, oh my God, that'd be great. But would it? Like, would you be prepared to just be? Would you be okay? Because you'd be like, oh my God, I think I'm supposed to like, and that's how you find yourself waiting for that other shoe to drop. Like, okay, I'm good. Wait a minute. Why am I good? Why am I good? Something's going to go down. So, that's kind of another thing to let you know that you have some unhealed things that you need to resolve. So one thing is your belief system, right? So we know that everybody is born in a program, with a program, not in a program, with a program, right? So again, I've said this before, everything in life is a program that you do. You're programmed as a child. This is how we do things. This is what we believe in. This is why we do the things we are doing. And then you throw in social media. You throw in just society as a whole, right? You're expected to do this. You're expected to do that. So you have all these limited belief systems. So now let's say you grow up with we'll use religion. We're not going to have a whole religious conversation. I'm just using it as an example. So let's say you were raised to believe blank, whatever you were raised to believe. Okay. And now you grow up, you're an adult and somebody says, and they're not judging your religion. They're not. They just go, wow, I am into witchcraft. I'm practicing paganism. I'm practicing witchcraft. I'm practicing Scientology, whatever it is that they're practicing. And all of a sudden you feel a little like there's a little threat that comes up there. It's an inner threat. It goes into your brain. Your amygdala goes, wait, no, that's wrong. Is it wrong because you don't understand it? Because see, when you don't understand something, you're going to be offended by it. You feel the need to stand up and put your chest out and you say, no, that is wrong, because you feel a little uncomfortable, right? Because you're like, oh my gosh, this isn't right. But it's not that it's not right. So then you get offended. You get offended because somebody isn't worshiping or practicing the same things you are, because it's uncomfortable for you. You don't understand it. You don't know it really to understand it, right? It's kind of like if you see a movie on witchcraft and you go, well, the pentagram means this, but it actually has everything to do with like nature, but you don't know that because you know what I mean? So it's like, I'm just throwing that out there for you. I studied religion. I didn't do it as a profession, but it was one of the things I wanted to learn. So I learned, and I have clients in every continent. So it's like, I wanted to learn different religions and places of faith so I could understand when I'm talking to somebody, not to judge them. Because see, being offended will also give you a certain level of superiority. You feel superior. When you're offended, you feel as though you are superior to someone else. I'm superior in how I believe is right. What is this? What do you mean? No, absolutely not. I can't believe that. That's appalling. No, it isn't. Why? Because somebody's doing something different than what you would do? See, so you have to understand that when you get offended by someone practicing a spiritual belief system or a religious belief system that is different than you, and you can't accept that it's okay that they have a different belief system, including your adult children, including your mom, including whomever, they do not have to believe as you do. So you get yourself offended, right? You get offended and you feel the need to defend, right? Anytime you're in defense of anything, that is a survival mechanism. You are defending something that you feel passionate by all means. That's amazing. But just be really careful, because when you're offended, you're the one that's suffering. The other person doesn't really care that you're offended for the most part. Like, it's not that they're purposefully offending you, though that does happen and we are going to address it. But Just because they believe something else different, or they dress different, or they marry different, or they identify differently, does not make them wrong. This is so imperative, and that you understand that when you take offense by somebody else, it's because it's challenging your inner space of security, right? Because when you believe something and you have your moral belief and you have your whatever, like I said, for this conversation, we're talking about religion, whatever your spiritual belief system is, you're comfortable there. So when something different comes up, it can be very like, oh my gosh, like you kind of spiral. And if someone says different, like, oh, I'm going to go kiss a tree because I love a tree, and you think, oh my God, that's weird. Like that's wrong. That's not what you do. I mean, in some spaces, people believe that yoga is wrong. People believe meditation is wrong. I love both of those things, and I need both of those things in my life, mostly meditation. I don't really do yoga as much as I would like to, but it's not my problem that somebody doesn't like it. And if you're offended by it, that's a you thing to process, right? So, and that's the thing is when you're offended, it's something you have to process. And then because you have to be careful of not offending someone else based on your offense. Because you saying, oh my God, that's wrong. And oh my God, da, 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 da. You now are becoming the offender. You know how you don't like being offensive, being offended? Now you're the offender. You're offending someone else. So so that's a good place to understand that you have a limited scope. This does not mean you have to change your belief system. This does not mean you have to do anything different in your own practice. But if you want to stop feeling so superior, because whatever you believe in, whoever, whatever, and however you believe is no more superior than somebody else. And if you think it is, that is a big space for you to focus on, because whatever you believe in is for you. It works for you. And by all means, rock with it, love it, embrace it, celebrate it. Just don't think that because somebody else isn't doing it, that somehow or another that's wrong. So that's number one, because what it does is it challenges your space of morals. It challenges morals. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's say it challenges your space of your belief system. Okay. Because your morals are also a limited scope. Right? Whatever you believe. Remember, we live in a really big world here. It's small, but it's big. And people on the other side of the world, from wherever you're listening to this, may practice something very differently, may believe in something very differently. In certain countries, certain animals are really sacred. And I mean, I'm totally down for that. And you might not understand it, but just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Right? So I want to repeat that again. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's wrong. Now, it may not be something that you align with. You do not have to be aligned with everything on this planet. Absolutely, you do not. But you don't have to take offense to it. What you do is you say, okay, this does work for me or this doesn't work for me. And then you accept that people have a right. They have a right to practice something differently than you. They absolutely do, just like you do, right? And so again, you have the superiority. Anytime somebody has superiority, it's always based in insecurity. You know how you see people, well, this is better and I'm better, and insecurity. There's no place in the world that there's confidence there. Confidence and offense don't live in the same world. Confidence comes when you can accept someone and something for what they are and then decide if it aligns with you. And if it doesn't align with you, there's no need to be offended by it. Okay. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper here. It becomes harder when somebody has gone through something where they feel oppressed, they feel hurt, they feel held down. And that is because you have other people who are walking around offended and in superiority who think that they're better. In turn, it's okay to hold somebody else down, and it is not. Okay. So when you're dealing with things like racial injustices, gender biases, it's not that you shouldn't be offended, so to speak. Yes, you can be upset. By all means, you can be upset. You can be outraged. The thing that becomes harder is because of that oppression and because you haven't been heard. This is a place of hurt and frustration, right? You are frustrated because you're like, why are things not fair? Unfortunately, in this world, things are not fair. It is sucky. I don't like it. But unfortunately, You have certain people. Remember, we have this weird thing where we have like kings and queens over here. We have presidents, we have prime ministers, we have governments, we have all of these things. And they sort of start dictating, right? We start playing the game of risk. It is not fair. You are right. It is not. So what do you do in that situation? Because where you run the risk, right? Not just in this situation, but all situations, is when you become defensive and offended. Very often your voice is not heard, right? And then they go, well, see, do you see this? See, you see what I'm saying? Like, this is what I mean. Look how crazy they are, So it's frustrating because you're like, your voice isn't heard. You get offended by things. Trust me. A little brief story here. So my children are biracial. And when my son he's almost 27 now, but when my son was in fifth grade, I think it was fifth grade. Fifth grade. We were living in a different house. We were renting this house, and he got off of the bus one day, and he came in and he looked really down. Like, how somebody says, and I say, hey, how was the day? It was good. Like, like really down. And I'm like, well, what's up? And he said, nothing, nothing. I'm fine. I'm like, you're not fine. Like, just break it down. Like, what happened? He goes, well, I was walking off the bus and this car drove by and there were 4 white kids in the car from the high school. Again, he's elementary school. And they yelled, go away or go in a tree or something, you N-word. Yeah, that's what they said to him. You talk about being offended? Now, you want to talk about mama bear instincts coming out? Like, are you kidding me right now? Like, what? So there was a bat by the door. My son had hit a home run when he was playing baseball. The bat was still by the door because it broke. And I did not call my husband at the time. He was working. I got in the vehicle. I had him sit with Sienna, who was like 8 months old at the time, 9 months old. I was going to go, in my brain, I was going to go and I was going to beat them. Like seriously, like I was going to go, I was going through the town at 75 miles per hour in town with a bat. I was going to beat everybody down. And I'm not lying to you. Like, it was going down. I was so mad and angry that he had to experience something as outrageous as this. So I call my husband, who is black, and I am pissed. I am crying. When I cry, if I'm angry and I cry, oh, that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign for anybody on the other end of that. I'm fine. But if I don't cry, like, it's going to be even more problematic. So I call him and I said, I'm so mad. A lot of curse words, a lot of things were coming out of my mouth. Calm as a cucumber. He goes, go home. I was like, what do you mean go home? I'm going to kill them. Like, seriously, that's where I was. He said, go home. So that sort of took me off guard because I'm like, the hell do you mean go home? He said, Lori, there are people in the world who will never accept him for who he is. Yes, he's biracial, but he's black. By all intents and purposes, he's black, right? This is going to happen. And if you try to walk through the world taking on beating everybody up in the world, number one, you're going to end up in jail. That's going to be a problem. Now that's not going to solve anything. Number two, what you're trying to get across to others is never going to come across that way. You look erratic. They're going to weaponize. People can weaponize the things that you're standing up for at times when you're erratic, can weaponize against you. Right now, again, I was like in my very early phases of, later phases of healing, early phases of understanding racial injustices. Well, that's not true because I grew up with it, but understanding more or less like, okay, I can't take on the whole world, and me being offended by it and me being stressed about it isn't going to help. And so when my husband came home later that day, he sat down with Bugsy, his nickname, Bugsy, my son, and said, listen, unfortunately, yeah, you're going to have to put your hands on 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. And that proved to be effective and true in his high school career, life. And, he said, but there's going to be people there. And if you walk around offended, you will never live your life. You will never make a difference because you're going to be offended. You're going to be angry. You're going to be disgruntled. And unfortunately, there will always be people who are going to be committed to never seeing your side. They're always going to be in a limited scope, right? And he said that to me. He said, remember, we have biracial children. Just because you're biracial, if you have, by government standards too, if you have 1% of blood, of African-American blood, you're black. And that's how you're going to be seen. And you don't have to like this conversation that I'm having with you guys right now, but it is the fact for people. Just because you don't go through it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But if you try to carry this burden on your back and being offended and screaming and yelling, and it's not going to get your point across, right? Now, fast forward ahead. My daughter is a lesbian and biracial. And in her 9th grade year, she's in 10th grade now, and she does homeschool. She was kicked in the back by boys on the bleacher. Derogative slurs, like bad slurs, the F slur when you're talking about gay people. There was a lot, and then N-word. So gender slur, racial slur. And by that point, though, we had already now it's done a number on her mental health. And she's understanding, too, that she can't just walk around being offended by everything, because ignorance is going to exist. There are people who are committed in their life to only seeing things from their perspective. That is emotional immaturity. It is ignorance, of course, but it's also this level of wanting to feel superior. Okay. So now this happens in all areas, right? This isn't just for Black people. This is for women. This is for so many other ethnic races. And, you know, now, and the funny thing is I am a white woman, and I was shunned by my white community when I was growing up because of the class status, right? We were considered white trash. And I was offended by everything. I was offended by everything. I was offended by, offended and hurt, right? Because think of offense as hurt. Think of offense as not having control. Think of offense as that, because then it'll help you understand your perspective a little bit so you can understand where you need to heal. I was embraced, however, in the Black community. I was embraced, and, you know, I had to sell weed on the corner, or, you know, at 7-Eleven. Well, it's still on the corner, but, you know, in 9th, 10th grade, while I was also waitressing and going to high school, because, you know, mom had passed, dad was an alcoholic, he was in the bar a lot, abusive, we know my story. And so when you go through certain levels of hell in your life and trauma in your life, it creates a survival skill. And so then you're offended by everything and anything somebody says. So I remember, and I was trying to think, like, I used to be offended by everything somebody said. Well, what do you mean? Huh? Are you crazy right now? Like, I was defensive and offended. But you have to understand that was my insecurity. That was my hurt. That was my no voice. That was my nobody's coming to save me. And what I mean by nobody's coming to save me is people knew that I was going through molestation. I talk about this in my book, but people knew I was going through my molestation, but it's that, okay, well, I'm not, and my brother, who I didn't even really talk to, like we didn't even have a relationship, did call Child Protective Services, but my trauma bond prevented me from being taken away. It's a whole thing. Read it in the book when it comes out. But your offense and you being offended glares on a darker space inside yourself. And it just means that that's a space that you need to heal. Right? And this is going to be difficult for some people to hear. People get really uncomfortable when it's like, oh my God, she's talking about race. Oh my God, she's talking about religion. I'm not saying anybody's religion is wrong. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying practice whatever you want, but be okay if somebody else practices different. Don't take offense to that. That's their journey. That's their life. If it doesn't work for you, just distance from it. It really is that basic. You're making things way more difficult because you have the unhealed trauma that you haven't resolved, right? And that's why over on Patreon, we're going to really break down some of these things and put it down into a worksheet just so you can start seeing where you need to work on. Because now, what happens when you know that there's people who are purposefully offending you, right? Because that will happen. Oh, that will happen. You know, and you've done it, so let's not get extra. I've done it. You've done it. We've all done it in a hurt state. When people are hurt people hurt people, which means hurt people are going to purposefully offend other people. They don't go out and go, I'm going to go offend today. But if they feel threatened, or if they are having a bad day, or if they're not good with themselves, they will often attack or try to offend you, right? So if they know you love a certain, okay, let's say it's a holiday coming up. Let's say it's a Christian holiday coming up. Let's say Easter, because we're around Easter, and they know, and they don't practice it, and that's fine. They don't have to. But they don't have necessarily a right to berate you either, right? But they will if they know it's going to irritate you. So if you've established a boundary and they don't like this boundary, okay, they're going to be like, oh, and then they're going to start talking about maybe Easter or church or something. I have massive religious trauma. So it's certain things that I just don't engage in, but I have enough knowledge in it to understand it. So if somebody debates it with me, I have just enough knowledge to be like, hey, if you pull out a scripture, I'm going to hit you with another scripture. It doesn't mean that I'm trying to be right. It just means that I'm letting you know that there's no superiority here. And so people will try to hit you below the belt because they know it's going to irritate you. Now, mind you, that's a choice. This goes back to being offended as a choice. People in your life, there are certain people, it doesn't even have to be a religion. People will try to do anything. They will say you're a bad mother. They will say you're a bad parent. They will say you suck at work. They will say you're useless. They will, narcissists use this a lot, by the way. And so, yeah, you get offended at first. And then if you haven't healed that, they're going to go beneath that offense. And now that's where you start second guessing yourself. Am I crazy? Oh my God, do I really need this person? Holy cow. Like now we're creating trauma bonds, right? So you have the offense, and then underneath offense is where you're like, oh my gosh, because being offended and being triggered by those things is a sign that you still need to work on something. So you will have those people who know your buttons. Your kids know your buttons, right? You know your kids' buttons. You know people's buttons. You've hit the jugular vein for them. When somebody has hurt, I was the worst offender of this. Oh my God. I can be ruthless because of like how I grew up and like kind of being in a gangster type way of lifestyle. And that's you just kind of had to survival of the fittest. So that's why like online trolls or things like that, listen, you have a right to have a voice, but you're not going to have a voice on my page, right? Like I'm not going to engage in you. I don't take offense to anything you say to me. You're crazy. I'm like, oh my God, please be a little bit more original. Number one. Number two, I'm blocking you. I'm going to keep it moving. And that's what you need to do. So you have to understand there's going to be people who will, not might, will try to offend you. They do this because they are hurt. I'm not asking you to walk around and be like, oh my God, I know you're hurt. I'm so compassionate to you. But in your mind, put on your compassion glasses. Distance yourself. They want a reaction. They want you to be hurt. They want you to be offended. And when you've done it, you've wanted the same, right? That's where you go into this weird, like I'm the karma police and I'm going to go inflict karma upon all these people. It's not your job. And the more you try to inflict karma, the universe is going to bring that back to you 3 times fold. So you trying to pull somebody else down and you trying to smear someone and you trying to judge someone and all of those things, that comes back to you 3 times fold. It doesn't speak volumes to them. It speaks volumes to you. Right? So you have to understand that you have your insecurities, you have your hurt, you have your not being heard, you have your feelings of unsafety, right? Like you're going to feel unsafe if you are a race or a gender that isn't considered okay to the person who's being offended is a little bit different than being attacked. Okay. So I'm not that vastly different. Being offended is a really higher end thing where you could like cope through that. Where we're being attacked and oppressed, that's a whole different ball game. And unfortunately, there's only so much that you can do. And that's why you want to stand up for yourself and you want to stand up for those things. But you don't want to do things like, I'll give you an example. And I've talked to Paul, me and Paul have talked about this before. Like, you guys know I'm a massive animal lover. I'm not a fan of fur. It's just, for animals, that's great, but not wearing fur. I would never be the person who's going to go grab red paint and throw it on somebody. I'll tell you why. That's not going to get my point across. That makes me and what I'm standing for look crazy. That makes me go, see, look at that crazy animal PETA person. Like, you know what I mean? So you have to be careful. And that was where Paul was saying when that happened with Bugsy. He's like, go home. He's like, this isn't going to get your point across. And he is, as a black man, is going to experience this for the rest of his life in various ways. And he's right. And so you can do something about it. If you see racial injustices, gender bias injustices, don't go snapping. You're allowed to feel angry. Of course, you feel, oh my God, you feel angry. Great. You feel outraged, but don't go erratic, because what you're trying to get across to someone will never come across to them. it will give you the opposite. It's like when two people are arguing, I'm going to let you win the day. You can argue to a blank space, because when you are in an argumentative state, no one wants to hear the other person's side. You are wasting breath. You are wasting energy. So I'm going to let you win the fight. Go win the fight. Well, first of all, we're not going to get into a fight, because I will walk away long before that ever happens. But go ahead. You'll talk to a blank space. And then later on, once you go through whatever it is you go through, I will try to have a conversation with you. If in fact you're still triggered by it, I'm only going to try so much, and then I'm just going to disengage. And that's emotional maturity, right? If we're thinking this world is ever going to be fair, you're going to have to come off of that. Again, studied the human behavior. I can promise you, at least in this lifetime, for everybody listening, you're not going to find a place where everybody is going to be kumbaya. And I wouldn't say it would be in our kids' lifetimes or their kids. I'm not saying it could never happen, because I know as a human being, you can't say what you won't do. I've done this profession for a long time. I've heard people say, I couldn't hurt somebody. They've done it. I couldn't cheat on somebody. They've done it. You couldn't unalive someone. You could, because especially, don't say what you could and couldn't do, because somebody comes after your family, comes after you, survival of the fittest. So you have to be careful of this box that you live in that says, I'm superior. So if I'm superior, I'm going to be offended. And then if someone's trying to offend you, disengage. People are trying to trigger you. You are falling into their line. And when you are, you know that you're still dealing with some emotional immaturity. That's fine, right? Stuff that we got to learn. Dealing with some unhealed traumas. And unhealed trauma is not having acceptance too. Unhealed trauma. That's not what I was going to say. Part of this journey is acceptance. And when I guess it is kind of still. Yeah, it is attributed to trauma too, because you're refusing to let something go. If you don't have acceptance, and especially radical acceptance, you're going to walk around offended all the time. Don't they understand this? Oh my God, can't they see I have a 3-hour drive? Like, oh my God, like why would they even expect that? Whoa, okay, so you're frustrated. Stop taking on everybody else's stuff. Stop taking everything that everybody says and does to the heart. Again, when our bodies and our brains are challenged and we feel unsafe, right? And feeling unheard is feeling unsafe. Feeling out of control is unsafe. It still is going to come to the root of that in insecurity. There will be people who try to offend you. If you allow that to happen, that is your choice. When people say words and actions, right, of their own, they're out there minding their business. They're doing their own thing. They're out there hugging a tree. You don't like it because something you read and something that you believe says that hugging trees are wrong. So now suddenly you're judging that and you're offended of their actions. You're offended of somebody's content. If you're offended by somebody's content, keep it moving, right? Just go ahead. We live in a world where people have a voice, right? And you're going to have the keyboard trolls. You're going to have the people who are going to sit behind a keyboard, who are very insecure. They don't know who they are. They're dealing with unhealed trauma, and they're going to try to attack people. They're going to try to smear people. Why are you breathing life into that? It exists. It happens. Why are you giving it life? Block them like a profession. Don't take on what they're saying personally. It is what it is. It is a choice that you make every day to understand that people practice different. People do different. People are different. People are in different stages of their life. Let me let you in on a little secret before we close. No one's getting out of here alive. No one. So the superiority of I'm better and this is better and this needs to happen and my way is right and this way is that and all this stuff, all of that is for nothing. Stay in your lane. Be solid with who you are. Stand up for the things that you believe in. I've been down with the LGBTQ plus community since before it was, quote, like big, you know what I mean? Like in the 90s, 80s, 70s, 90s, like I was down with gay people when gay people weren't, they still have a problem now, but when it was really like unsafe, I was still there because I don't care what you do, whatever you want. Like, as long as you're not harming anybody intentionally or hurting animals or anything like that, I'm here for you. And even if you're doing those terrible things, I can't sit there and carry on the world. I have saved animals. I have rescued animals. I have helped other people rescue animals. I've helped people. I've helped. And if I do that, I'm good. I can't save the world. You got to understand that. And just because somebody believes different than you doesn't make them wrong. So I want you to start really working on that. Like what areas, and you know, this goes over to YouTube too, right? So go over to my YouTube. What areas, and please let me know in the comments over there. What areas do you feel that you still need to work on because you're offended? Be honest with yourself. This isn't a judgment. Don't say, oh, I'm good. I'm nothing. Well, if you're offended, you have, people can't offend me. Oh, you suck. Okay. You're a terrible mom. All right. Like you're not going to offend me. It's just not going to happen because it doesn't matter to me. And I'm not going to be mad at you. I'm not going to wish ill will on you. I know that you're in a space of hurt. I'll be like, are you okay? Do you want to set up something? And if the answer is no, and you get defensive, then that's fine. I'm just going to block you. It's fine. We don't need to communicate, even if you're a family member. But you got to be solid in that. All that energy that you're focused on other people doing this and needing to do that and expecting this and all of these things that happen, you got to channel that energy back to yourself and look on the areas that you need to work on. That's your homework. And when you start feeling yourself being offended and outraged, great. Or not the offended part, the outrage part, great. But channel that into a productive way, into a way that can get your point across. Make a difference in calm and direct and fact-based things, not opinion-based things. Opinion-based things become problematic. Fact-based things people don't like, but they are what they are. And you're going to get more flies with honey than you ever will vinegar. Okay? So again, check yourself and say, what areas do I still need to work on? And give yourself grace and compassion.